All right, everybody. So for this video, we're going to be talking about how to get a perfect 180 fold. Now, for those that may not be familiar with what a 180 fold is, it's a preparation that we can do to our book prior to marking it for book folding that is going to do two things. One, it's going to increase the bulk within our book, meaning that it's going to create a thicker, more clear image within our design once we actually fold it. The other thing that it's going to do is it's going to help us add some structure to our pages. Now, they call it a 180 fold because essentially what you're doing is you're taking the page edge of your book and you're going to be folding it back 180 degrees, hence the name 180 fold. Just like when you fold the corner, we call it a 90, or if you're folding to a 45, then that's how we refer to it. For a 180 fold, we're taking the page and folding it back 180 degrees. So in order to do that nicely, we're going to need to basically hit 5 major points. The first of which is going to be choosing the correct book to start your project. So choosing a good book for a 180 fold is especially important. And there's a few things that we're going to look for when we're choosing our book. The first thing that we're going to be looking for is obviously you need to choose a book that is going to fit whatever pattern it is that you're folding. So we need to have enough pages to fold our pattern correctly. And we're also going to need the correct height of our book pages in order to complete the pattern that we're going to be working on. So that's going to be our kind of first constraint, is we need a book that has all of those criteria to fit our pattern. Now, with 180 folds, it's especially important that we narrow it down even more than that. So we're going to want a book that has decently thick pages without being so thick that they're hard to fold. So the reason I say that page thickness matters when we do a 180 fold is because we're actually going to be going in and scoring our book page, and we need something that's going to be able to hold up to that. So if you choose a book that has very old, very brittle pages, or when you start to curl your pages, they start to crease or crack or crumble, that's going to be something that you're going to want to stay away from. You're also going to want to kind of run your fingers along it. You want to make sure that you're not ending up with a book that has pages that are going to tear easily for any other reason. So that'll be kind of the next thing that you look for. However, on the other side of that, if your pages are very, very thick, I've come across pages in books that are almost cardstock-like. You want to be careful of that too. Not to say that they can't be folded, and not to say that we can't score them to fold them as a 180, but just keep in mind that the thicker the page, the more bulk that it's going to add to your book, and the harder that it may be to fold certain styles, such as like a combi fold. So just something else to kind of keep in mind. Again, not the end of the world, not that I'm trying to steer you guys away from it, just something to keep in mind. So I try to find something that has moderately thick to thicker pages, and I find that that tends to work best. The next thing that we're going to be looking for is that there's going to be no stains within our book. So with 180 folds, since we're not actually going to see the edge of the page most of the time, you're going to be taking the edge of this page and we're going to be folding it back. Certain staining along the edges of the page might be okay, but what you're going to want to be careful of is when you open the book, if there are stains along the outside, that they're not creeping into the page. A lot of times if you find a book that has water damage or perhaps was marked with like a marker, that may bleed onto your page further. And depending on what depth that we end up scoring to, that staining may end up showing in your final design, and that may not be the look that you're going for. The kind of next thing that we're going to look for is going to be your page kind of evenness. So when we're looking at our book, you want to find a book that has fairly smooth pages, such as this one. You're going to want to stay away from deckled edge books, which, for example, is one like this that has very uneven, kind of ripped organic looking pages, this will not score well. We're not going to be able to start with an even plane, which means that our end result is not going to be as even. Kind of working down the line here, this is a perfect example of a book. So this is something that I would be a pleasure to do a 180 fold on, if you will. So it has nice even pages. They're not curved in any way, either out or in, which I'll show you next, but they form a very nice, very crisp kind of 90-degree angle. They're very smooth. There's no staining. There's no texture. This is exactly what it is that we're going to be looking for. Now, also make sure that you're checking the bottom and the tops of your book for any markings. If you're buying your books at like a thrift store or like a library sale, a lot of times they'll put different stamps or markings on your pages, either on the top or the bottom, to signify that they perhaps were taken in by that particular place. And again, it's just something that you want to be aware of. If it's on the bottom, you may not be able to see it. If it's on the top, it might be something that shows, and just something that you guys might not want in your end result. The last thing that we're going to talk about sort of with this is going to be these like curved pages. Now, this is a really good example. This is an older book. The binding is starting to give way a little bit, and there are ways of fixing that to kind of straighten this book back out. We can drop some hot glue down into the spine, which I do recommend doing for most of your books once you have them folded. So there are ways of fixing this, but in general, to kind of look at books like this, and there are books that I have come across, books that are brand new, that have a very sturdy spine, that still have this curve to them. Sometimes they curve in, sometimes they curve out. The problem that we're going to end up with is if they start curved, our 180 folds are never going to end up perfectly straight because we're not starting with a straight canvas. So you want to make sure that you're looking at your book from all angles, because if we turn this way, there's some markings and stuff, but for the most part, this is a fairly smooth kind of finish to these pages. But it's not until we turn it this way that we really can see how kind of curved these pages are. So this is a book that would either need a little bit of work before we were able to score it properly, or it's something that maybe we would skip altogether depending on what it is that you're looking to do. Okay, so once you have your perfect book, the next thing that we're going to talk about that creates a perfect 180 is going to be picking the correct depths for whatever style fold it is that you're going to be doing for your book. So before you even open your book, you're going to need to decide how it is that you want to fold it. Are you going to be doing it embossed, which means your image is going to protrude out from the edge of the page? Are you going to be folding it inverted, which means that your image is going to be inset into your page? Are you doing a multi-layer fold where you're going to need various depths in order to create either parts that stick out and parts that stick in, or things that stick out at 2 different layers, things that are folded in at 2 or 3 or 5 different layers? You're going to need to decide how you're going to fold it. A combi fold still can require a 180 at times if that's the look that you're going for. So if that's the case, then that's something else that you need to take into consideration. And once you decide on how you want to fold your book, we need to decide within that if we want our text to show once we finish our project, or if we don't want our text to show. And if we do want it to show, what parts of our project do we want it to show on? For instance, you can have a book where if you're doing an embossed 180, meaning that your image is going to stick out, and we want to have our tabs that stick out be white, but we want the background of our fold to have the text showing. We would need to choose depths that are going to work to achieve that end result. Same thing if we wanted to do an inverted fold. So if we wanted the edges of our pages to be white, like the background of our image to be white, but the parts that are recessed into the book, do we want those to be white as well, or do we want those to show the text to give it some depth? It's all personal preference. It all depends on how you choose to want to fold your book and the end result that you're going for. So these are all things that obviously I can't decide for you, but they're all things that you need to keep in mind when you're choosing the depths that we're going to fold our book at. So once you have an idea as to how you want your end result to look, we're going to open our book and we're going to measure our margins. And what I mean by that is the edge of the page to the start of your text. So we're going to decide or determine what the deepest depth is that we could possibly score a line at that is going to keep your page totally white, so that it's not going to hit the text whatsoever. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use a ruler. This is one that I have that I cut in half, and it's a little bit see-through. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my starting mark, which is right here, and I'm going to sort of line it up with the edge of my text, something like that. And I'm going to look and see what the depth is. So for instance, this one is about 1.6 centimeters. And I'm going to measure various parts of the page. Again, this is like 1.6, maybe 1.7. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that throughout multiple pages within the book. When a book itself gets bound, it's bound in sections. And those sections are then folded in half and glued onto the spine of the book. And depending on how accurate the machines are, how accurate the human is that is working on the book, the pages may not always be all the same depth. They may not have consistent margins, at least not as consistent as we're looking for. So we want to make sure that whatever that depth is that we decide on is going to work throughout the whole book. So I go through, and again, 1.6 looks like it clears on this page. And then I'm going to take another chunk of book, and I'm going to look here, and I'm going to line it up to 1.6, and it does look like it works here. And again, 1.6 works here. And that also looks good. And it actually looks like the margin gets a little bit deeper as I go into the book, which is a good thing. So it does look like 1.6 is going to work. Again, 1.6 is there, so that will clear. This one looks like it sticks out. Again, 1.6 is fine. And then we'll check something right at the back. So that also looks like it'll work there. It gets a little bit tighter again here, just like it did in the front, but not too bad. Some other things that you're going to want to look for within your book are going to be page separation things. So like at the start of a new chapter, sometimes they put like a bar across it, or sometimes there's like a decorative border on your chapter pages, and those may have a different margin than the rest of your book. In that case, you have a couple options. You can either fold that page in the opposite direction if it's not something that's super like densely colored that you're going to be able to see through the page. Your other option is to remove those pages and minus that count out of your book page count. But it's something to be aware of. The other thing is you're going to want to look for your page numbers. Sometimes page numbers stick out further than the margin of your text. If that's the case, you're going to want to take into consideration what that's going to look like. If you have, you know, a fold and you have this kind of like black wavy line of where your numbers show, but then no text shows. So it's just something else to kind of keep in mind to look for within your book. The other thing that we're going to look for and to kind of be mindful of is that the front of your page and the back of your page may actually have different margins. So it's not always the world's worst idea to go through and measure the front and then flip your book over and measure a few along the back as well, just to make sure that when you're scoring, it doesn't clear on this side, but when we go to fold our book, that it's actually going to be into the text on the back side. Now, it doesn't really matter which way you fold your 180 fold, whether you fold it toward the front of the book or toward the back of the book. You just want to make sure that whatever way that you fold it, that you're consistent throughout your whole fold. So The third thing that we're going to be talking about to get that perfect 180 fold is going to be using the correct tools. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go out and you have to spend a ton of money and you have to get all of these things that I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to show you the things that I use to get that perfect 180 and why they work for me. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is a folding frame. Now, again, I'm not saying that you have to have this in order to get a perfect 180. The reason that it works for me is because it has this backing board that I'm able to secure my book to, which I'm going to show you why that's really important in the next step here. But you're going to need something that you can push the spine up against in order to keep your pages stacked at a 90. And you're also going to want something that's going to be able to hold your pages out of your way in order to have a clean working surface on your book. Now, once your book is in your frame or you have something in order to secure those pages to, I use these scoring guides, which are 3D printed plastic guides that butt up against the edge of the page of your book to score against. Now, they come in a varying kind of size range, if you will. So this one is like a 1.5 centimeter. I have a 1.1, a 0.7. I print them up to 3.5, 4, however deep it is that you need them to be. Now, the depth of the guide or guides that you're going to want is going to directly correspond back to how it is that you want to fold your book. So for our book over here, we had talked about that we had a margin of 1.6 centimeters. And with that being said, if we wanted to say do a embossed fold with a 180, meaning that the tabs that stick out from the face of the book are going to be 180 folded. So they're going to have doubled up tabs basically. We're going to need two depths that are less than whatever our margin is. If we want the background of our pages to be white as well as those tabs to be white. So for that, I would choose, say, a 1.5 and a 0.7. I will have a whole separate video that I can link in the description box once it's up to how to choose the perfect size depending on the book and the type of pattern that you want to use. Okay, so the next tool that we're going to talk about is this seam ripper. This seam ripper is something that I get on Amazon. I get a 2-pack for fairly inexpensive. I think it's like $7 or $8. And the reason that I love this seam ripper to score with, and what I mean by that is once you have your guide on there, this is what I use to actually run along the edge of the guide, is because it's nice and pointy, so I get a really good, sharp, crisp, clean score line, but it's not so sharp that it tears into my pages. I have used lots of seam rippers. I have used lots of other tools in order to try to achieve that perfect score line, and this just seems to be the one that works best for me. You can also use scoring tools. They make actual tools for scoring. I find them to be very sharp most of the time, and they don't tend to have quite as much of an accurate point on them. So I try to stay away from those. The other thing that I've seen people use are like the really small size dotting tools. And I know a lot of people that have had good luck with those. Again, this just seems to be kind of my go-to. The sort of last thing that I'm going to talk about that in addition to those that you're going to need is something to secure your book to your frame with. Now, I tend to use a shoelace. You can use twine. There's a whole bunch of other ways that you can do it. I've seen people that use very large binder clips. But the shoelace just seems to be what works best for me. And I also like to have kind of a variety of other style clips just to have around for when I'm securing my book or potentially my pages to my frame. So once you have your tools gathered and you know what it is that you're going to use to get that perfect 180, the next thing we're going to need to do is secure your book to your frame or to whatever it is that is going to be holding your book while you do your scoring. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, keeping your pages at a perfect 90 is going to be almost number one to getting your perfect score. And the way that I'm going to start kind of doing this is I'm going to take my book and I'm going to take the front cover of it and I'm going to put it up between these dowels here. I'm then going to take my shoelace and I'm going to wrap it around the edge of my pages of my book, not the cover, but the pages, very loosely, and just kind of drape it here. And I'm going to take the tail ends of it and stick it out the back of my frame. And then I'm going to spin my frame around so the back is facing toward me so I can see it. Let's move some of this stuff out of the way here. And I'm going to take my shoelace and I'm essentially going to tie a slip knot. Now, you can tie this in a double knot, you can tie it in rabbit ears, you can tie it however it is that you feel most comfortable. But I'm going to kind of shift it down toward the bottom of that block and I'm going to pull fairly tight. I'm not going to pull so tight that it starts buckling my pages on the other side, but I'm going to pull fairly tight. And I'm going to tie my slip knot and I'm going to attempt to keep it as tight as I can. So I just tie a little slip knot like that. And then when I turn my book around, you're going to take your shoelace and you're going to be careful because it's going to want to kind of wrinkle these pages. So you're going to do this carefully. You're going to make sure that your shoelace is fairly far down on that backing block. And you're going to take the corner of your shoelace and you're just going to hook it onto the corner of that cover of your book. Now, very carefully, you're going to stretch the other side, and I tend to hold the side that I already did kind of in place as I do this, but you're just going to hook it down and around the cover corner on the other side. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to suck your spine back into that backing block, and it's going to hold it there. So that way, as you get deeper into this book, I can lift up all these pages and see how my book stays at that nice 90-degree angle. If I didn't have it secured and I lifted up a bunch of pages, my pages are going to start laying out, and that's not what we want. So by securing that all the way back and having it nice and tight, we're going to be able to place our scoring guide onto here, and it's going to measure evenly all the way through our book. A tip and trick that I'm going to talk about really quickly is securing the pages of your book. So this is kind of a little aside. This isn't necessarily how to get the perfect 180, but this is just another tip that if you're struggling with your tabs, so say we have these first few pages folded, or you have this first page folded and you want to stick it up underneath your dowel, there are going to be times where that page isn't going to have enough pressure against it for the first few pages to be able to hold its shape very well. So that's where these guys come in, these little handy dandy clips. So I just tend to pick an area of the book that doesn't have a ton of detail, that's nice and sturdy, and I'll use these clips to clip the pages to the cover of my book very gently. For the first like 30 pages or so, until those dowels start really being able to compress those book pages. These other ones are Clorox brand, I think, and they're like rubber tipped clothespins. These work really well. If you are going to use that little tip or trick, just be sure that if you're going to store your book overnight, I don't suggest leaving them on there for hours on end. You're going to want to continuously kind of move them around because you don't want indents within your page. So you're going to want something that has tension, but also has a soft enough area where it's coming in contact with the page that you're not leaving dents or creases. So these are like rubber dipped, so those are nice. These have like that rubber kind of inside to them. These are great. I have a miniature version of the pink ones as well. I picked all of these up at Dollar Tree. They're not crazy expensive. But it's just something else to kind of have within your arsenal to really get that good fold in those tabs that don't get all tangled with each other. So now that we've talked about the right tools, now that we've talked about how to secure your book, the last and final fifth tip and trick that I have in order to get the perfect 180 is going to be using all of those things correctly. So it seems kind of foolproof, right? That you would just take the guide and you put it along the edge of the page and you take your seam ripper or whatever it is that you're using to score and you just run the line across, right? And you're not wrong. But there's a few nuances that I want to talk about to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck out of the tools that you have. The first of which is going to be to make sure that you're not getting lazy with your wrists. And this is twofold. This means on the guide and on your seam ripper. So when you're using your guide, you want to make sure that you're pushing it, not like that, but pushing it all the way up against the edge of your page of your book. So you want to make sure that your pages are pulled all the way forward. You want to make sure that you're using the guide to press all the way evenly from left to right, that your guide is making contact with the top and bottom of your book, and that you're holding enough pressure on it that as you go to score against it, you're not going to accidentally score harder than you're holding your guide and that your guide is going to slip. Now, that's obviously very exaggerated, but I've seen a lot of times where people are getting uneven scores because they're rushing through it. Not to say that this can't be a fairly quick process once you're kind of in the rhythm, but getting that form and that technique down is going to be really important. You want to make sure that it's in contact at all times, that you're scoring all the way from left all the way to right at the same depth, that your guide isn't sliding around on you. Now, left to right doesn't make so much difference because they're accurate all the way across. But again, just making sure that if you're heavier handed, either starting or ending, that your guide isn't turning one way or the other. The other thing with your wrist is you want to make sure that you're using your seam ripper or whatever you're using to score your book evenly all the way across and all the way throughout your book. What I mean by that is that I'm not taking it and I'm not using the side of it like this to score, and then the next page I'm using it with the ball facing the other way and using this side to score. And I'm also not going to change the direction of my wrist. So if you want the crisp, clean line, you want your hand to be all the way above your work, you want the back end of the seam ripper to be facing downward, and you want to be consistent with the line that you're scoring all the way across. Now you're going to want to use moderate pressure. Every page density is going to change, so it's going to change how hard or softly you need to press. But you want to make sure that you're staying consistent with the angle of your wrist. If you start getting lazy and you change the angle and you start kind of like laying out your wrist and scoring this way, even though the edge of these guides are very thin, which is helpful in the accuracy, if you rock your seam ripper up against the edge of this, you're going to get a different score line because the tip of that is going to move at different angles. So you want to make sure that it's pressed all the way up against the edge of it, and you want to make sure that you're even from one side to the other. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about using your tools properly is not switching up your tools halfway through your project. If you're using this 1.7 guide for this project, make sure that you use this 1.7 guide to complete your project. Same goes for your scoring utensils. You want to make sure, in order to stay as consistent as possible, you're staying consistent with your tools. Though these are accurate, if you're getting them from multiple sources, and even from the same source, honestly, there are times where the printers aren't dialed in exactly the same. I mean, these are still, at the end of the day, either laser cut, 3D printed. They're done by machine, and they're as accurate as they can be. But again, depending on how the machines are dialed in and the sources that you're getting them from, there might be slight variation. And so I would hate for you guys to get halfway through a project and notice that there is a variation between tool to tool that could have been avoided by just sticking with the same tool all the way through your project. So just something else to kind of keep in mind for your most consistent 180 folds. All right, guys, so I hope that helps. I hope that all of the tips and tricks that I gave you guys will come in handy, and they will be able to enable you guys to get that perfect 180 fold. Just as a quick recap, the 5 points that we talked about here are going to be: 1, choose a good book. You want one with even pages that are not deckled, they're not curved, they're thick and even, and we want them to be not stained or ripped in any way. Number 2 is going to be picking the correct depths. So we want to measure the margin of our book. We're going to want to make sure that it's conducive to the style that we want to fold. And then we're going to sort of choose the depths that we want to fold or use to score to get those folds. And 3 is going to be using the right tools. So you're going to want to decide the depths, make sure that you have the scoring guides or whatever it is that you use to score your pages in the correct depths. You're going to want something to score your pages with, something to hold your book, secure your book to, and also something to hold your pages if necessary. Number 4 is going to be securing your book to something to get that nice 90-degree fold. Again, a frame with a backing board is my preferred method, but there are other ways out there, other things out there that you could tie it to get the same effect. You're also going to want something to hold your pages back as you work, just as a little, again, aside. The more pressure that's on your pages, even consistent pressure on your pages, your tabs are going to get a lot less tangled and the outcome of your book is going to be a lot better. And lastly, number 5 is going to be, once you have your tools and you have your book secure, that you're going to want to use your tools consistently and properly for the way that they were designed. So again, you want to make sure that those pages are at a 90, that you're using consistent pressure with your guides all the way from right to left, and that whatever you're scoring with, again, has consistent, even pressure all the way from right to left and all the way through your book. So with that being said, if you follow all of those steps, there is no reason that your 180 fold will not be perfect. As always, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. I also have a Facebook group that is wonderful and helpful in getting those questions answered. I have lots of other videos that are uploaded to that Facebook group. I'll put the link in the description box below. Also, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me put out more content, but it also helps alert you to when I do put new content out.